Hey friends, Steve Lummer with Outdoor Nations Network and TrailheadTacos.com. Just want to say thanks for joining us on this video and a little bit of a storytelling segment of past, present, future for Outdoor Nations Network and for Brenda and I as well in what God has for our next, where we've been, and how God has used certain scenarios to shape our life. I'd like to introduce Michael Taylor, a fellow mountain bike friend of mine, an adventurer, businessman in the community. Michael knows our story. He knows the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that's why he's here today. So Michael, welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me in. Looking forward to our talk today.
God moved us to Prescott, Arizona. I had no idea what Prescott, Arizona was. My parents had moved to Scottsdale from Iowa, so I was closer to them, about 90 minutes. So I felt, good about that because at their age now, the youngers kind of try to be close to them, to tend to them a little bit. So anyway, we moved to Prescott, and all of a sudden we were confronted with a challenge and an opportunity because the former leadership was trying to sell the property and rebrand it, and I got the prospectus on my desk. Hey Steve, what do you think? I said, well, if you guys have been in this for a couple of years, let's keep going. Therefore, the planning and zoning thing that you and I had talked about. So that was in 2003, and then we did that whole effort to turn that ship around for 10 years. Yep. And the 10 years, we had some success. I mean, we went to 2 services. We moved them from a little sanctuary into the Family Life Center and kind of upgraded the facility a little bit, but it just wasn't going to work. So that was at that point in 2010, 11. I was like, man, should we stay here? Right. And God just never released me to leave Prescott. Plus, I didn't want to leave a church in a quagmire, in a down position. I wanted to, get the church what I thought He was calling me to do, to be a flourishing, thriving community of faith. And then, that whole 2008, what do we call that? The Great Recession? Yeah. For me, it was a Great Depression. And so one of the best things that I did was I had an old mountain bike that I bought in St. Charles. It was an old Trek 26-inch hardtail, no suspension. And I tried to climb this hill up Granite Basin Road, and I couldn't make it. I mean, I'm overeating because of stress. Mm-hmm. I'm totally stressed out as a pastor. And that bike really just started kind of melting the pounds off and melting the stress away. Mm-hmm. And then I bumped into some people on a trail. And I thought, well, that would be fun to ride with people. Mm-hmm. And they were just blowing by me. I mean, like huffing and puffing. And I thought, well, I need to go get a new bike. So I saved up some money and went to Cindy at High Gear Bike Shop and bought this Trek Bomber mountain bike that weighed like 40 pounds, and it really helped drop the weight for me for sure because the thing weighed so much. And actually, Robert Middlemore and that whole group, I just kind of saw them out in the Pines, which is the Emmanuel Pines right over here. And we started meeting up on Saturdays and Mondays, and it was just fun. Yeah. It was just the adrenaline I felt, and it was like just really great, healthy diversion from all of that stuff that was just that weight and the stress, and no matter what industry you're in, we all have stress, we all have stuff that we're dealing with. So mountain biking for me was like this personal therapy that really helped my mental health, even though I didn't, because mental health wasn't a thing back then like it is now, but it just helped me inside, and I just began to get in it. And then we kind of met together, and then we started doing rides together, and then our friend Dave Sewell said, well, let's do some races, and then the famous Whiskey Off-Road mountain bike race. I think my daughter and I did that in 2005. We did the Whiskey 25, and I think we both finished it in 7 hours. Which, anyway, we're just having fun, right? And so that was the beginning of the ministry of mountain biking to me.
Right, and it seems like that's where the phrase came that you use often, which is get outside and let God speak to your inside. Because the mountain biking has certainly been healthy for us both spiritually as well.
Yeah. It's, we have a mutual friend, and I remember, all the mountain bike community knew I was a pastor, and I was trying not to be pushy about church onto my friends because I wanted them to be my friends, and I didn't want them to, think that I was just out there trying to evangelize them,
Right.
And even though that's important, right? But I wanted to stay friends, and I remember one night it was beautiful. We had climbed this hill, and we were looking at a sunset, and it's a given, Pastor Steve, and he looked at me and said, "Steve, why would I come to church and think about my mountain bike when I could be on my mountain bike thinking about God?" And I thought, wow, that's a powerful statement,
Yes.
powerful question. And I began to consider that because he was my friend. And so through all of that stuff that seemed to be negative, God used the negative and the positive thing of mountain biking and being with friends to think about doing church differently. And I didn't know what that looked like. I had no idea what that looked like until finally the old cloth of the old church just was not going to work. It just, at some point, you got to say the thing's dead.
Yeah.
And that was the point where I knew that the thing was over. So how to navigate that, I reached out to some ministry friends that weren't in my situation. So we came to a point where we knew that one thing was over, but now we have to move into another thing. And I had gone to a minister's adventure trip with our ministry network in Zion National Park. Yeah,
I want to get to that story.
Yeah, right. And so we were in Zion, and I had done an interview with a music pastor from St. Louis that was part of Jesse Quiroz' church in the St. Louis area, Journey Church. And he had come out to an interview, and I thought, what a great opportunity for an interview, to not interview in a fluorescent lit room in a boardroom, but take this guy to Zion National Park for 5 or 6 days and see what he's made of. And so, we both went, tents, and then we did a rappelling event down into Pine Creek Canyon with the Chi Alpha leadership that was leading this adventure trip. And it happened that we were down in this Pine Creek Canyon that is an epic trip for sure. And I was with one of the leaders. We were taking some pictures, and all of a sudden we heard a cry for help. And it was this man that I had brought out to interview as our music pastor, and he was drowning or seemingly drowning in Pine Creek Canyon, those freezing waters in those canyons and those slot canyons. And so our guide from Chi Alpha jumps in to save the guy that I'm interviewing for a job out here.
Right. After telling everybody not to jump in.
Yes, yeah, he jumps in to save Jason, and he breaks his left ankle.
Yep.
And so we're in a pickle. So I'm good with pickles because I've been in them before. And we got a situation.
Yeah.
And so we end up getting him down to the bottom of the last rappel. He rappels the last, I think it's like 100-foot free fall rappel. We get down to the bottom, and then the rest is walking out of Pine Creek Canyon. It's impossible for him to walk out. So we, 3 of us, stay, the 2 Chi Alpha guys and myself, and the rest go out to get help. So about an hour later, this couple come over the ledge rappelling, and it happens to be a search and rescue guy with his girlfriend on their day off. But between then, what we had was a conversation. And I had told the guys, they knew our history for 10 years, and I told those 2 men, I said, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to put my wife through this. I'm not going to, And I offered them, I'm like, why don't you take the property? We'll check with the district to see if they would do it. And the guys said, no. They said, Steve, why don't you do something different? Why don't you do church differently? Why don't you do a mountain bike church? And it was at Pine Creek Canyon that Discovery, that outdoor church, was birthed because of those two guys. Like, we don't want your stuff,
Right.
you know. And Kevin's sitting there with a broken leg, you know, ministering to me as I'm totally, you know, destroyed pastorally.
Right.
And so, anyway, they ended up lifting him up 600 feet through those tunnels. If you've ever been in Zion National Park, you know those tunnels. So they lifted him up, came back, and shut the church down. Sometimes you have to do that. I didn't want it to be on my watch, but sometimes you have to shut the church down. And so we shut it down, and then we started a brand new ministry that was at a local college, and we just really focused in on outdoor events.
And what was that called?
That was called Discovery Church, Discovery Prescott is what we called it.
Yep.
And it was a different, man. It was not for your average Christian.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Discovery was great, though, because it reached a lot of people who had not been attending church anywhere else.
Yeah.
And they found a place to come and learn about Christ.
Yeah. It actually, around 2000, I think it was 13, Michael, maybe you can help me with my memory, but that's when the whole Yarnell fire thing had taken place, the losing of the 19 hot shots here in Prescott, and a lot of those folks, you know, one of the mothers of hot shots came to church that day. I remember
June 30th, 2013.
Yeah. And it was just, in fact, we're dealing with that right now,
Yep.
and which they just, I guess, dedicated a memorial
Yep.
down on the town square. But so we started this church that was different, and we didn't wear suit and tie. I know nobody does now, but back then. And we did, our first event was a canoe trip down the Verde River with about 50 people. And man, that was the largest baptismal service we ever had, because there were canoes flipping, and, you know, but people loved it. And then, and it wasn't for everybody, you know, but it was for this niche market of people that I call the outdoorsy, the outside tribe. And they started, you know, coming to these events, and North Rim, Yosemite, Zion, Moab, I mean, you name it. And we would do outside church as much as we could. And we saw a lot of friends come to Christ.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yosemite, I always remember hiking Half Dome with you, and longest day hike I think I ever did, and going up the cables up to the top was definitely a memorable experience.
You didn't hike with me, you hiked ahead of me. You guys were coming down Half Dome when
That's
I was
true.
going up.
That's
I'm like,
true.
these guys are picking them up and setting them down. But it was a wonderful experience for people. For me, it was so cool to sit at one of those vistas and have like a Sunday school class on Taft Point and look down through the valley and talk about God's creation.
Gathering at Glacier Point.
Glacier Point, right?
And then that transitioned into your Stars event,
Yeah.
where we did the same thing, but on a local level, where people could access it on day trips or come camp with us and learn about God outdoors.
Stars was an experiment to let people explore God through creation in what I call I picked this up from Michael Easter, who wrote the book The Comfort Crisis. He has a rule called the 3-day rule, and it's for people outside, or people that do outside events. It takes at least 3 days for everything to shut down. Cell phones, emails, all this angst inside, this nervous twitch of our soul. It takes 3 days at least to just breathe. And so that was our attempt to do 3 days in the wilderness. And many of those Stars events in Arizona were during the monsoons.
They were challenging.
So I remember some of our friends going, Steve, you've got to look at the monsoonal dates.
Yep.
And so we did that. And you guys, this year you did Stars and the weather was perfect.
In June.
Yeah, it was perfect. So I remember we were at Lockett Meadow in Flagstaff and looking at our friends put their tent up and a river's going through their tent. And so lightning is striking everywhere. We're diving into the church van to try to save our lives because it's, death trap up there. But yeah, so that was Discovery, and And so we're very, very grateful that God let us mix what our passion was, outdoor events, with church. And I don't know, I had never seen it done before. We were scared to death, but at the same time we were excited, because we didn't have the boundaries and the structure of a regular church, which I was raised in for 50 years, but this was different, and it was freeing. And then to see, I mean, like people like Toby York, I met Toby at the Hike Shack here in town, and I was going into the store with my billfold with my credit card, which is dangerous to go into an outdoor store with a credit card. And he was just standing on the stoop, the stairs there at the front door, and he just said, "Hey, are you Steve? And do you have 2 dogs named Lewis and Clark?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Hey, I'd love to have coffee with you." And so we went to Prescott College and had 3-hour coffee. And then I went on a short mountain bike trip with him above York Jeep Chrysler, up by In-N-Out Burger, where his family had run that dealership.
Sure.
And we sat looking over the dealership on 2 mountain bikes laying on the ground, and he shared his story with me. And then he said, "Hey," after like 2-hour conversation out on the trail, "do you think it'd be okay if I come to your men's cafe?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." So Toby started coming to that, and long story short with Tobe is he found out we were going to do a 4-day Colorado River trip down the Grand Canyon, which, by the way, I mean, if you can't meet Christ in the Grand Canyon, all things were created for him and by him. That's why we took people outside, so God could speak to their inside. And we just felt that God teed up evangelism for us through creation. We didn't have a pulpit, we didn't have a 3-point sermon. We just said, "Welcome to awesome." Anyway, Toby goes on this trip with his wife, and he gets baptized in the Colorado River, and it was wonderful to see that. And again, affirmation from the Holy Spirit, you're on the right path, keep doing this. And unfortunately, a couple years later, Toby had battled with cancer for years, and he was in remission. And then after baptism, I think we lost Toby. He was 41 years of age. And so we did the memorial for him right down on Whiskey Row. And so we baptized Toby in the Colorado River, and I know I'm going to see Toby in the rivers of life in heaven someday. So it's going to be super cool. Because God allowed us to do church differently. A friend of mine, Mark Batterson, used to tell us, he would say, there are ways of doing church that no one's ever thought of yet. And he was pushing us to do church differently. And so that's discovery was kind of birthed out of that statement. Yeah. Like there's ways of doing church that no one's ever thought of yet.
Well, and you've used that throughout the time I've known you. You used adventures and getting outside to reach people, and not through, making them do anything. It's engaging them in the outdoor world. I think about the Yosemite trip, 24 hours of Old Pueblo down in Tucson. All these adventures that we've done, and the people that have come to Christ, and people that see that activity, even on the Verde River, people seeing us doing baptisms in the river and joining and wondering what's going on and how can I be a part of this. And it's been great.
This is a church? That's what we hear all the time, right? This is a church?
Right.
Yeah, and they, okay, I want to go to this church.
Right.
It was the funnest church I ever pastored. Yeah. It was the funnest ministry I ever had, even beyond youth ministry. Yeah. It was like, it was just an outdoor church for people that love to have fun. So, yeah, speaking of Old Pueblo, we would do, we did for 3 years this 24-hour mountain bike race. And we had a team. It's called 4.5 Men.
4.5 Men.
Because we had, and
co-ed.
We had a co-ed mountain bike team. And for 3 years straight, we did this 24-hour mountain bike race, and we would do laps. I remember coming in and passing my baton, I think it was to you, and maybe, I don't know, 12, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning shift. Yep. And I remember handing you the baton, and I look out the tent, and the wind and the rain is blowing sideways, which was bad enough. But then I saw this 50-gallon water barrel go flying past you, and you went out into the oblivion and did your lap. And then I was there, and I asked you, like, Michael, how was your lap? Because I was expecting you. Man, I almost died. You said it was the best day of my life. So those were the fun things, It's like it's not an adventure till something goes wonky, and we called it the hurricane of Old Pueblo. 24 hours of hurricane in Old Pueblo, but. Yeah. Anyway, that was that, and then we did the whiskey off-road mountain bike all the time, and then the training rides that we would do together, and then just so many friends, just so many people that I think if I were to go out on the street and hold a Bible and say, you guys need to live this way, I think I would have had less results than just hanging out with people on the trail. Yeah. And no, I don't think, I know. Yeah. Because it's a level playing field, and kayaking, the rivers, the canyons, the mountains, all that kind of stuff. Jesus says in Luke 14, he says, go out in the highways and hedges and compel them to come in. And I really resonate, not so much with the highways and interstates, but I resonate with the hedges, the ledges, the rivers, the mountains, the canyons, and compel them to come in. Yeah. So
Steve, you mentioned Outdoor Tribe, and I can imagine what that is, having lived it with you for a number of years. But talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, the Outside Tribe is a demographic in the United States of America that the U.S. Department of Commerce just came out with the fact that in 2022, in the United States of America, $1.1 trillion was spent on outdoor recreation. That's $3,800 per person in the United States of trying to get outside, whether that's kayaks, hiking shoes, running shoes, mountain bike, whatever. $1.1 trillion was spent in 1 year in outdoor recreation. The demographics have already been done for us through REI. Let's just take REI for example. In every city there's an REI. There's people that are wanting to go outside. Why? Because REI says this is a great demographic for a business model. And so I didn't look at it as a business model. I just looked at all these people that were just loving to go outside. I did an experiment, Michael, on an Easter Sunday a few years back. And so what I did was I did my Easter services, right? With all the stuff we do for Easter, for church. Mm-hmm. And then right after the service, I didn't say goodbye to anybody. I didn't stand around and shake hands. I went right to our local trailheads here in Prescott, and I just drove in and looked at the people. And every trailhead was packed on Easter Sunday. There were more people going to church out on the lakes than there were in churches. And I didn't get the numbers and all that, but I know their parking lots were packed. And so I began to think about this. I began to think, I have tried in this town for 20 years to get them to come to my box, to the building. And some did, but the majority of the demographic, they work 5 days a week. Saturday's a catch-up day. And then we have this tension in the church to say, hey, come on, get in here for 4 hours of your day and bring your kids and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But there's a tension there. We're asking something. So I had thought, we need to go to them. And I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it. We're just going to go to them. And we're going to not be some over-the-top weirdo group. We're going to be a people that they're like, I'll have what he's having. And so that's what we begin to do. And so all the mountain bike races, which were awesome, all the events and the trips, I mean, just getting people around a campfire is huge, because I believe that if you build a good campfire, everyone will become a good storyteller. And see, that's where the magic happens. Or if you want to use a religious term, that's where the ministry happens. We've seen so many conversations around campfires.
Okay, I wanted to make one other point here real quick. One of the other things about Discovery Church that I felt, besides the outdoor component, is that you've always been welcoming of all people.
Yeah.
nobody's excluded, much as Jesus would have done.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
I was one of those people, and my church welcomed me, and I didn't have to be this good little church kid. Even though I'm like fourth generation ministry people, I walked away from God because it felt so stale and so odd, and it was clunky for me as a person. I loved riding my mini bike and mountain bike and motorcycle in the woods, and then my mom would say, you got to go to church. I'm like, oh, come on, man. So I think there's a lot of people like that, and sorry to spill the beans, but that was me. And so my church welcomed me just as I was, like that Billy Graham, just as you are. And I came in there with my jeans and my long hair, and they welcomed me, and then they helped me find purpose. And so I thought, I want that kind of church for the town I'm in. And there were a lot of people that began to come to Discovery that weren't your everyday church folk, and their language and the dialect they use was not Christianese, and their lifestyle was not Christian in the realm of the traditional church. But I loved them, and it was difficult for me to navigate, for my wife and I to navigate through that, being a church kid my whole life, and trying to raise people in holiness and all that kind of stuff. And I found out a long time ago, you can compel them, but you can't convince them. Right. And so we saw a lot of variety of different lifestyles come to Discovery. And one day I'd ask my wife, I'm like, what should we do? What can we do? Because I felt like we were more in the demographic of non-Christian than Christians in the church.
But still, it was all based in the Bible.
It was based on the Bible. Yeah, it was.
Don't give people the wrong idea. Everything you did was biblically based.
We taught the Bible and the best we could. And Brenda said to me, she said, Steve, it's better that those folks are with us than not.
Absolutely.
And so I would encourage you, like, if you've got folks of different lifestyles, man, that's perfect. It's beautiful. And that's why I just loved Discovery, because of the variety. We were fringe for sure when it comes to the Christian circle, but the gospel was preached, people were healed, people were saved, marriages were restored, young people found out that Christianity isn't boring, that generosity is awesome, and you can have fun.